3, 2, 1.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the webinar. I'm Dale Medeiros and work with my friend and colleague Debbie Spiliotopoulos as a Senior Regional Planner for the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. We have the pleasure of welcoming Dr. Ralph Buehler, an Assistant Professor at Virginia Tech's Department of Urban Affairs and Planning. Ralph is the co-editor of a new book he has just finished on the topic, Cycling for Sustainable Cities, MIT Press. Today, Ralph will share the designs, policies, and strategies that German and Dutch cities have developed to the benefit of bike and pedestrian safety programs, and how these might inform equivalent efforts in Northern Virginia. We feel that the timing of this webinar is very, very important. The COVID pandemic has pushed us outdoors, onto the streets and bike paths in greater numbers. But despite a drop between 2019 and 2020 in bike and pedestrian accidents and fatalities, there's a consensus that biking and walking the streets of the region could be safer. Furthermore, data is emerging that points to substantial demographic inequities when it comes to the numbers of the victims of pedestrian and biking accidents and fatalities. Across the Atlantic, urban design and transportation planning policies in cities such as Freiburg and Groningen have evolved over decades that have made Dutch and German pedestrians and cyclists 5 times less likely than their US counterparts to be fatally injured in traffic. German and Dutch cities have incorporated holistic car-free central business districts, complete streets, rigorous biking and driving training programs, and the prioritization of walking and biking over automobiles. Moreover, the design and planning for walking and biking in these cities demographically serves a large spectrum of society and diverse social groups. German and Dutch cities plan and design transportation that encourages high levels of cycling, extensive systems of separate cycling facilities, intersection modifications and priority bicycle traffic signals, traffic calming of neighborhoods, safe and convenient bike parking, coordination and integration of cycling with public transport, traffic education and training for both cyclists, motorists, and traffic laws that favor cyclists and pedestrians. The format for the webinar is simple. Ralph will speak about his work for approximately 30 to 35 minutes, and afterwards there'll be a question and answer session. All the participants will be muted, but if you have any questions before, during, or after the talk, please enter them into the chat box, and we will make sure that they're answered. Thanks again, Ralph, for taking time to share with us the results of your research and your work. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for everyone to attend this webinar. The title is Cyclist and Pedestrian Safety, Case Study of Germany and the Netherlands. But as you'll see in the presentation, I'll go wider than just those 2 countries in looking at safety for pedestrians and cyclists. Many governments on local, regional, state, and federal levels worldwide are promoting walking and cycling, mainly because they are very sustainable modes of transportation. From the environmental perspective, there's virtually no pollution at all when walking and cycling. There are almost no non-renewable resources used. So to combating local and global emissions from traffic, they are perfect modes of transportation. They're socially sustainable, they're financially affordable by most. They are physically possible for most, for bicycling, even if you may need a bicycle that's specially tailored or specially made. And there are physical, mental, and social health benefits from physical activity that you get through walking and cycling. And many of us have noticed that during the COVID pandemic, people wanted to be out and walk and cycle. And they're economical, not just for the individual, but also for the public sector. If you think about building bikeways or pedestrian infrastructure compared to building highways, compared to building transit systems, it's less expensive. And there is, of course, improved health from cycling and walking that can help reduce medical costs for individuals and society. The next couple of slides, I will compare pedestrian and cyclist fatality rates in the US and European countries. And then after that, we'll investigate what can be done to make walking and cycling more safer. This graph and the following graphs will show you fatalities per inhabitant for the countries, so per capita, relative to 1990 levels in the US compared to the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, and the UK. The first trend we have here is in pedestrian fatalities. But you can see also here we have grouped them into 5-year buckets. to control for outliers in the data. This is the US trend, improvements in pedestrian fatalities from 1990 to about 2010, and then a backsliding and worse pedestrian safety. If we look at the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, or Denmark, we first see that they made greater gains than the US, and that they don't have this strong backsliding as we see here in the United States over the last decade. This is the same data for cyclist fatalities. Again, the US goes first. Improvements in cyclist fatalities per capita until about 2010, and then a backsliding towards more cyclist fatalities per capita. And again, the Netherlands, Germany, the UK, and Denmark have made more progress, and then haven't seen the backsliding that we have here in the US. If we look at the car occupants, again, the same data, we see improvements in the US, again, until around 2010, and then a slight backsliding even for car occupants. Then in the UK, the Netherlands, Denmark, and Germany, we see again greater gains and not that backsliding that we see here. In the next step, we were not just interested in cyclist fatalities per inhabitant, but we wanted to control for exposure. So we wanted to look at the miles or kilometers walked or cycled and calculate fatality rates that way. This graph shows you the pedestrian fatality rate per 100 million kilometers walked in the US, the UK, Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. And in the year 2000, we see a much greater safety for pedestrians in the European countries compared to the United States, which are much higher fatality rate. By 2008, all countries had statistically significantly reduced that fatality rate, so have made progress for pedestrian fatalities. And then if we add the 2016, 2018 timeframe, we see continued progress in the European countries, but a backsliding in the US, as we had seen in the other data before, so even controlling for exposure, we see that. Similarly, for cycling, we see the same pattern, much greater safety for walking and cycling in the European countries compared to the US in the year 2000, improvements across the board until about 2010, and then continued improvements or stagnation in the European countries and the backsliding for the US. Last of these graphs looks at motor vehicle occupants. Again, slightly more fatalities in the US in the year 2000, improvements in all countries by 2010, and then continued improvements for all countries. That's in contrast to the bicycling and pedestrian rates we looked at before, but again, safer driving as well in the European countries. Now, in the following, I want to quickly summarize what we took from that study, and then we dive into what can explain the greater safety in the European countries. First, the per capita pedestrian and cyclist fatality rates in the US fell much less between 1990 and 2010. The pedestrian and cyclist fatality rates per million kilometers are much higher in the US than the other countries, and the difference is increasing over time. The steady but slower progress in the US reversed around 2010. We have sharp increases in fatality rates, and with this widening gap between the US and the other four countries, especially for walking and cycling, and overall a serious and worsening overall traffic safety problem in the US, especially for pedestrians and cyclists. Now, why can this be, or what are reasons that help explain it? And we looked at various factors, and I'm only going to present a couple of those here, but vehicle size matters, vehicle miles traveled, so how much driving there is, bikeway, pedestrian infrastructure and street design, speed limits, traffic calming, etc., parking restrictions, traffic laws, their enforcement, drink driving and distracted driving, as well as traffic education. But so all of this is, of course, happening in a transport system, and the US has probably gone the furthest from the countries we looked at in accommodating the automobile. So in the US, we have created a system that's sort of centered around a lot of driving. We have minimum car parking standards for new homes, offices, and stores in most places still, not in all, but in most places. We provide ample on-street parking and parking garages. In cities, we have turned many roads into one-ways, especially during peak hours to move more volume of cars. We've synchronized many traffic signals to speed up car travel. Engineers use concepts like level of service, where they are rating stretches of roads or intersections based on the delay vehicles experience traveling through those. We have interstates and other major roadways in most cities. Ordinances often strictly separate the land uses and make trip distances really too far to walk and cycle. And there's a tradition of spending much more on roadways than dollars are paid in taxes on vehicles. So the US has sort of gone from a transport system in the 1900s, 1910s that was organized around walking, trolleys, bicycling, and some horse-drawn vehicles to one that's really accommodated the automobile. And the trend is not just in the US, is a global trend. It's towards more car ownership. This shows you the cars per thousand population. The US is leading there on top, but then followed by Canada, Australia, Austria, Germany, and the Netherlands are a little bit lower here. We don't just own more cars, but also bigger cars, especially over the last 20 years or so. Cars that we use for passenger transport have gotten larger and larger. These are the two top best-selling models of cars in the year 2019. These are very, very big pickups, and that has implications for pedestrians and cyclists who get hit by larger vehicles. It's not only owning more vehicles, it's also making more trips by car. As you can see here on the left, in the US, about 85% of all trips are made by car, 11% on foot, and 1% by bicycle. And as you go to the right and look at the various European countries, you can see that the black bar there, the driving, decreases as the percentage of trips, and the others, the foot in orange, bicycle in sort of a maroon color, and public transport in brown sort of increases. The Netherlands stand out here with the 29%, of course, for bicycling, and then other countries have higher shares on walking. The Europeans followed the US. They went in the same direction towards accommodating the car, but they pulled back earlier. This is a scene from a small German town, about 60,000 inhabitants, 1950s. I've put the arrow there so that you can notice that fountain, because you will not recognize it anymore in the next picture. We have a trolley there, we have bicycles, we have pedestrians, and we have some cars. By the 1970s, there's the fountain. The old building was torn down. It's called urban renewal. The roadway has been widened. The trolley tracks are still there, but the trolley is not running anymore. And this is the colored postcard, by the way. So the city put this on a postcard to show how great they are, but clearly it's a space that's for automobiles now. And ironically, somehow they photoshopped, there was no Photoshop then, of course, this red portion here that's almost nearly hitting the child. But that's the progress. That's where they went. But then they turned around their policies, and today there's the fountain. The building is still there. It looks a little nicer, but it's a place that's for pedestrians and for cyclists. So it's a policy decision how to use this space. Similarly, in the German city of Freiburg in the 1950s, you have this bridge in the center city that crosses the main railway connection that divides the city, and we have cars and we have trolleys on that bridge. By the 1960s, the trolley is gone. It's the automobile is the mode of the future, and it's a bridge for automobiles. Today, it's a bridge for bicycles, and pedestrians can walk on this side and the other side of these blue things. Again, a policy decision how to move people in the cities. So the point here is that the European countries went the same way the US went in accommodating the car, but they pulled back much earlier. They didn't go as far. But even in the current US system, there's plenty of potential to increase walking and cycling. About a quarter of our trips are shorter than a mile, and 40% are shorter than 2 miles. But even for these short trips, this shows you the percentage of trips made by walking and cycling for different trip distance categories. We see that Americans walk less and bike less for these shorter trip distances than in Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands. We also see that there are big differences in who walks and cycles. This shows you the percentage of trips made by bike for different age groups. And so over here in the US and the UK, we see that cycling declines with increasing age, and but less than 1% of trips by 70-plus-year-olds are made by bicycle. But compared with the European countries, we see that the youngest age group has the highest percentage of trips by bike. That's the people who don't have a driver's license yet. But even after having a driver's license, between 10 and 28% of trips are made by bicycle. And for the oldest age group here, it's between 10 and 23% of trips that are by the 70-plus-year-olds that are made by bike. In the Netherlands, almost a quarter of all trips by those 70 and older are made by bike. Similarly, if we look at the percentage of bike trips made by women, we see that in Australia, the UK, the US, and Canada, only about a third of bike trips are made by women, while in the European countries here and Japan, about 50%, about half of all bike trips are made by women. And a lot of research shows that safety, or perceived safety, is a key determinant of cycling and also of walking. So the safer cycling may help explain why we have a greater share of older individuals, a greater share of women among cyclists. This shows you a phenomenon called safety in numbers, which means the more walking and cycling, we find it for both modes, there is in a place, the safer it is per trip or per kilometer walked. So we have the Netherlands over here with about 900 kilometers of cycling per person per year, and they have the lowest cyclist fatality rates per 100 million kilometers. On the other end here, we have the United States and Italy up there with very unsafe cycling conditions. Causation again runs likely both ways. Greater safety encourages more people to ride, and more people being out there is correlated to greater safety because drivers are expecting cyclists, they're watching out for cyclists, etc. Also works the other way. This shows you a chart from the Netherlands, where we see from the 1950s to the 1970, late 1970s, here about the huge fall in bicycling kilometers per inhabitant per year. That's when car use skyrocketed and cities were adapted to car use, and the car was accommodated. And at the same time, we see in blue here the cyclist fatality rates. The cyclist fatalities skyrocketed as well. So the safety in numbers goes both ways. And then we of course see that the Netherlands did something here, like many European countries, and they sort of turned around the fate of walking and cycling. So how can we encourage more cycling and walking while improving its safety? It's better facilities for pedestrians and cyclists, mixed-use zoning to improve urban design, restrictions on motor vehicles, improved traffic education for motorists and cyclists, traffic regulations and their enforcement, and of course special events and promotional campaigns. And I'll take you through some of these in the next couple of slides. First, bikeway infrastructure is really important for cycling and safe cycling. This shows you for the various cities you see here in Europe and North America, and I think there's also Bogota in there. So in the Americas, we can say the growth in kilometers of separated cycling facilities they built over about a 20-year time span. In the next color, you see the growth in cycling these cities experienced, and then in the black color here, we see the decline in fatalities and severe injuries relative to the cycling levels. So all of these cities have made cycling safer per kilometer cycled or per trip cycled. The variability here in the increases in cycling is partly related to the fact that some cities already had a network of cycling, and they made that network denser, and other places have just sort of started from scratch. This is what some of these facilities look like. In Copenhagen, in Denmark, it's typically the cycle tracks at the intersections. They've chosen the blue color. Here in the US, you may be used to the green color. In Germany, it's red. They're also often curb separated along major roadways, where next to the roadway you have a little curb up to the bike path, and then you have another curb up to the pedestrian walkway. Montreal is maybe the most famous example for an early cycle track system here in North America, with a concrete barrier here that separates cyclists from motor vehicle traffic. Sevilla, Spain, they have built a fence. In Bogota, Colombia, they are using these caps that we also see more and more here in DC, for example, on Pennsylvania Avenue. That's what they are using at the moment there. These are some iconic protected cycling facilities in famous cities. Paris, France has had a veritable bike boom, especially during COVID now, but also London, England is increasing bicycling. And then of course on top you have New York City and their cycle track here with its own bicycling signal head giving cyclists a green light here when the cars that turn left have a red signal, and vice versa. But you don't have to be a world-class city to promote bicycling. These are bicycling facilities in new suburbs in Germany. They are built next to the walkway, so the reddish area is for the bikes, the gray area is for pedestrians, and it just allows people to ride bikes in an environment where car travel speed is probably between 50 and 70 kilometers per hour. That's maybe 40, 45 miles per hour. That's too fast to share with traffic, and it enables making trips on foot and by bicycle in those environments. A new trend that's emerging that also increases convenience of cycling and the safety are bicycle expressways. These are often regional bikeways that are separated from traffic. Often also cyclists are separated from pedestrians, and you're not crossing major roadways at grade if you cycle on these. So whenever there is an intersection with a major roadway, you either have a tunnel or you have a bridge, speeding up bicycling or walking, and also at the same time taking away the risk of crossing, of interacting with fast moving, lots of high volume of motor vehicle traffic along those routes. In Germany, they are mainly at the ground level. They also get into cities. They're harder to build in cities because there's less space. They're somewhat easier to build further out. In Beijing, in China, they built a new elevated facility where you're sort of above the city and above traffic on this bicycle expressway. What's important about this bikeway infrastructure is to have integrated networks. This shows you the city of Amsterdam, and Amsterdam is by no means the most bike-friendly city in the Netherlands. It's a large city and it's very bike-friendly compared internationally, but there are more bike-friendly cities other than Amsterdam in the Netherlands. But what you see here in red is they are separated bikeways. In orange, if you really squint, you can see some orange is what they're planning to build in the future. And then on top of that, of course, you have low speed neighborhood streets where bikes and cars can share. So having integrated networks that allow people to cycle from A to B on separate facilities increases the safety and increases the likelihood people will pick up cycling because it's perceived to be safe. A new import from the Netherlands into the US are these Dutch-style protected intersections. This is an aerial shot from a Google map from Salt Lake City. I'll briefly explain how they work. A key are these safety islands here. And if a motorist, let's say, starts over here and they want to make a right-hand turn, by changing the radius of this turn here, you're really forcing them to turn very slowly and to meet a cyclist who may start from here over here at a low speed. So if there is a crash, you can either avoid it or it's a crash at a lower speed. At the same time, you're increasing the visibility for the cyclist by the motorist making this turn and seeing the cyclists for a longer time period. Many of these intersections also have a leading green light for cyclists so that cyclists pass through first before the motor vehicle comes. And then cyclists can, of course, cross here. The crossing distance, as you note, is shorter than the normal roadway. So the traffic speed is slower and the crossing distance is shorter. On the other side, cyclists can either start queuing here, waiting for the green light to go down here, or they can, of course, continue on straight. And if they get a green light, they can then go down and make their left turn. For pedestrians, many German and Dutch cities have car-free pedestrian zones in their downtown. So they're not allowing car traffic in those areas. And there may be delivery times when trucks can enter, typically in the morning or in the late evening, to go to the stores. There are also often people with disabilities or taxis transporting people with disabilities are allowed into those areas at a very slow speed. Again, this is a policy decision. This is, again, Freiburg, Germany in the 1960s. They used their main town square as a car park. Then they turned this around, and today it's a place with a market and outdoor seating for restaurants. Not that different from what we currently see, maybe a transformation in Old Town Alexandria, where we, due to COVID, now have one block of King Street closed and in use for pedestrians instead for car parking and moving cars. Speed is very important, and reducing speed is very important for pedestrian and cyclist safety. This is a graph from the OECD and the World Health Organization showing you the probability of a fatal injury for a pedestrian when they collide with a vehicle. Here we have 25 miles per hour in most residential streets around here, or even 35 miles per hour. Most streets where people may still walk, and you're well up the curve here in terms of a likelihood of being fatally injured when hit. It's not only about being hit, it's also about the possibility to not hit someone. This is a graph from England, but essentially what it shows you here is the different car travel speeds you have, and then how long it would take you to brake. I think the distance I chose here is only 12 meters out. You could push it further out, but the point is, the faster you travel, the more thinking distance you cover before you brake. Takes you time to realize you have to brake, and then if you brake, the longer it takes you to actually get the car to a standstill. So it's not only about a lower likelihood to be fatally injured when hit, but it's also a lower likelihood to actually hit someone if you travel at a lower speed. Traffic calming can be very extensive. This is a picture from Vienna, Austria, and sort of all the areas in the pink color, in the blue color, in the dark green color are traffic calmed areas for the city. It's a city of about 2 million inhabitants. The color in light green are parks and forests. So you see that I think something like 80% of all the roads in Vienna are traffic calmed. What do traffic calming measures look like, and what do they do for pedestrians and or for cyclists? The upper left here, we have traffic calming in a sense that if a car goes from this larger street and turns into the residential street, you have a change in pavement here, and then you are mounting up to the pedestrian sidewalk or the pedestrian level, and then at the end of this you are going down again. So the car is entering the area of the pedestrian and leaving it again. Here we often do it the opposite way, that the pedestrian goes down into the automobile's space, and the same on this side. Here we have at the corner, similar to what we saw with the safety intersection, these bulb outs or neck downs, what they are called. They're sort of changing the curve radius and forcing automobiles to make a very slow 90-degree turn. Also note here the parked scooter and the parked bikes. These are car parking spaces that have been taken out at the intersection to increase visibility. Just imagine and we'll see pictures later of that, a big SUV being parked there and you not being able to see into that intersection. Here it is. And then this is a street that formerly went through and now became a cul-de-sac for cars, but pedestrians, as you see with the sign here, and bikes can still go through. On the left, this is a bicycle street. It's a street where cars can enter, but sort of have to yield to bicyclists. This is again another example of what traffic calming looks like, this time in Freiburg, Germany. The pink color and the blue color is traffic calming, and the yellow is where they sort of try to channel car traffic to. In white, you have the main pedestrian area in the downtown. The blue areas here are interesting because they are traffic calmed to walking speed. That's 7 kilometers per hour, maybe about 3 miles per hour. And that can be retrofitted, or new suburbs can be built to this traffic calmed standard from the get-go. That's an example here. So you really only go there if you live there or if you have to go there. There's no through traffic cutting through. This is an example for retrofitting. Again, in a period when in Europe the car was accommodated, the car has been allowed to park on the sidewalk, even encroach on the pedestrian space. And then here today, the car travel lane is narrowed. We have some trees there. We have pedestrian benches, pedestrian scale lighting, turning this into a pedestrian-oriented street. We also have examples of traffic calming here in the US. A lot of it is on the West Coast with neighborhood greenways or bike boulevards that even prioritize bicycle traffic on those low car travel neighborhood streets. A new thing that's coming up in Europe are these so-called shared streets, where pedestrians, cyclists, and cars share a space. And I'm going to try to show, there's no sound with it, but I'm trying to show a little video of what it looks like. And I apologize for the video because I took it myself, but it gives you an impression of what a shared space here looks like. They still have kept the distinction between the roadway and the pedestrian area, but you can use the space as you see fit, and nobody really has the right of way, and everybody has to negotiate this space. And that's sort of how it works. It's a major shopping street. It was very controversial to be implemented. In the end, they did a referendum of the population that decided to go ahead with it. And you see that cars can drive through, that they go really slowly, and they really only drive there if they really have to be there. The parking spaces here for the cars are only for picking up and dropping off things or people. And taking away the speed really makes this a safe area. Let's see if we can go back to the presentation. Here it is. This is sort of putting it all together. The city of Berlin in Germany. You see in the different, in red and in yellow and in green, you see their bikeways that are separated from car travel. And then on top of that, you have traffic calming or super traffic calming to the 7 kilometers per hour in the neighborhoods. And that has helped this large city to increase the share of bike trips to 10%. Now it's even at 13%, so it keeps increasing. Some problems for pedestrians, or common problems for pedestrians. Some of them have to do with enforcement. This is just that I walk a lot around the area here, and these are just some examples. So here, for example, it's very hard because the car parked much too close to the crosswalk to actually see the pedestrian. The other two pictures are similar. It's cars even parking in crosswalks, and here you can see the effect of the size of a vehicle. This is a daycare center. That's why a child is there. The car parks in the crosswalk, and then the child comes out between the cars, and you cannot see them. Here is a sign that says you should yield to pedestrians. It doesn't say you should yield to the sign, but somebody clearly drove over that sign. This is an intersection that's very typical in accommodating car use. You can come down here, it's actually even downhill, and make a very quick, very fast right-hand turn, no changed curve radius. The pedestrians that are crossing here where the car is very dangerous. Same as here, you can make a very, very fast right-hand turn coming from here. On top of that, pedestrians cannot cross in all directions. They sort of have to navigate to cross here first and then cross over there. And then the last thing here is we see that a lot in this area are these crosswalks across 4-lane roadways. And I checked on the standards in Germany, and it doesn't exist in Germany. It's considered to be too dangerous. They are putting in pedestrian traffic signals for that. And the threat is very simple here. If you have 2 car travel lanes in one direction, one car may stop for you as a pedestrian. You step out, and at that point, the car coming from the back simply cannot see you, and they may not be ready to stop, or they may not intending to stop, and they may hit you when you are stepping out here. There's some remedy. You can put some warning signs or shark teeth up here, but it's not an ideal design for pedestrians. Training is also very important. In Germany, the Netherlands, and Denmark, most 3rd or 4th graders have bike training in school. They first learn about it in the classroom, and then they go to little parcours. In big cities, they have permanent traffic gardens. In smaller cities, it's just on the in some parking lots. They're drawing these traffic gardens, and they are police administered. DC is the first so-called state here in the US, even though it's not a state, that is implementing this for 2nd graders, I think. Pedestrians and cyclist rights are included in motorist training. So when you get a driver's license in the written test and also in the driving test, you learn about the rights of pedestrians and cyclists. Are they allowed to be on the road? And do I have to yield to them? And when do I have to yield to them? It's very important. Many drivers here often think that you don't have the right of way because they don't know about the rights of pedestrians and cyclists. And with that also goes defensive driving. I failed my driver's test in Germany many years ago not because I hit anyone, God forbid, but because they claimed that I wasn't attentive enough. So we were driving through a neighborhood street, and they said I was not ready to brake at any moment because kids could run out between the cars. Or when I opened my car door to leave the car, I didn't look back over my left-hand shoulder first to make sure that there's not a bicycle coming. So it's also sort of ingrained in motorist training. Land use, of course, is important to allow for short distances to be made on foot and by bike. And the design of communities can also help prioritize these other modes. These are pictures from 2 new neighborhoods built in the 90s and early 2000s in Freiburg. What they did is in the neighborhood streets, they're traffic calmed or super traffic calmed. This neighborhood street here doesn't even allow permanent car parking. You can only park there to load and unload. And sort of giving the neighborhood streets to the children as a play area, and cars can enter there, but very, very cautiously. We also see the main streets here are designed around public transport, very tiny streets for cars. The cars can access, but the main mode that they have intended here is to come and leave by public transportation. In some sense, we have examples of that, of course. Of many of these things, we have examples. This is an example for the land use change, the Roslyn-Boston corridor, of course, in Arlington, with the metro rail alignment that went under roughly Wilson Boulevard, and the bullseye concept, which today you would call transit-oriented development, where they changed the zoning and the land uses to allow for dense and mixed-use development around metro rail. In that case, and so they were able to shape the land use of that corridor. Now, to leave enough time for questions, quickly my conclusions. Cycling and walking are sustainable means of getting around. There are many benefits. Many daily trips are short enough. Many cities in the US and in Europe are implementing measures that help promote walking and cycling. There are many measures out there already that help improve the safety of walking and cycling. So it's a matter of implementing them in your community. Before we close, I want to make some self-promotion. Dale mentioned it already. Our new book just came out in February. It's called Cycling for Sustainable Cities. Doesn't focus on walking at all, but if you're interested in safe and convenient cycling, you may be interested in looking at this. Now, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to try to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie Spiliotopoulos. I work with Dale. And you actually have a number of questions and one comment. And the comment is actually for Dale, and it's my fault because I didn't catch it in your comments, Dale, but if they're not accidents, they're crashes. So just, that's how the terminology we use. But I have a bunch of questions. The first one is, how does Canada compare to the US and European countries in terms of their bicycle and pedestrian facilities?
So, okay, I'm still unmuted. So Canada has, we saw Montreal that has more cycling facilities, a longer history of cycling facilities, especially these cycle tracks. Vancouver is also a city that has taken great steps towards promoting cycling, but also other Canadian cities like Ottawa, Toronto to some extent have promoted cycling. So overall, bicycling is higher in Canada as a commute mode share. There are cities in Canada that are ahead. There are other cities that are not ahead, especially compared to Portland, Oregon, Minneapolis, Minnesota, San Francisco, etc. So these leading cities in the US. What's interesting about Canada is traffic safety is higher than it is in the US. It's more towards Europe. It's not at European levels. And the same is actually true for the bike mode share, the walk mode share. The European countries are further ahead, but Canada is more towards as well. And interesting about Canada is also trip distances are shorter. So their land use patterns are they're not as compact as in Europe, but they're somewhat more compact than the United States. But the compactness alone, as we saw with the numbers about the UK, maybe we didn't see the UK here, but the UK has very low cycling levels, especially also among women, even though they have compact developments and they have compact settlements. So compactness alone is not enough to promote the bicycling. I hope this answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. So the next question is, the report seems to relate safety to policy and where one may choose to live for their lifestyle. And I think that was kind of a comment more than a question, but Dwight, if you want to put more into that, I guess it's just, what about people who don't have a choice of where they're living?
I mean, so the point was not to make it a choice. The point is to create environments for everyone where they can have access to these. At the moment, because we don't have enough of them, we have to choose to move to these environments. And if we can't, we have a problem because we can't. But what we have to do as planners is we have to make sure that we are building environments that are safe for everyone. So it shouldn't be a place that we have to choose or have to seek out. It should be a place that we have. And one thing I didn't mention here, but we looked at these crosswalks and safety issues with crosswalks. Missing crosswalks are another very big issue, or missing pedestrian crossings. I do not only walk, I also drive around here, but sometimes driving around this area, you see pedestrians running across 4-lane highways and you wonder, what are they doing? But then you think about it and you look, where's the next crossing for them? The next crossing is 1 mile either way, but the bus stop is across the street. And so we are sort of thinking about, well, pedestrians, let's just walk a mile this way and come a mile back, and then you'll be at the bus stop. And that's why they are running across. So we have not thought about pedestrians in designing these environments. We have to think about pedestrians, especially around public transportation, and facilitate pedestrian access. So my intention was not to say it's a lifestyle choice. At the moment, it is very much a choice because we haven't made enough of these safe places.
That's an excellent point, and I think the data supports what you're saying as well with the number of mid-block crashes. So there are 2 questions I'm going to put together into one from Bruce Wright and Jeff Gauger. I hope I said your name right. Because of a lack of connected neighborhoods and streets, we often are forced onto arterials. How do you tame the arterials? And then the second question was, should advocates for bicycle safety support or oppose bike lanes that are nothing more than a paint stripe? So both the disconnect in our routes and our trails, how do we tame, and when you have to get on an arterial? And then the second part of that is also, what is your opinion about bike lanes that are just painted?
Okay, so they're both difficult questions. Let's do the first one with the connected neighborhoods and the arterials. I think the solution is sort of 2 ways. One is trying to connect the neighborhoods more with cut-throughs or connections between the cul-de-sac areas. Taming the arterials is very hard, but if we know and if we have pedestrians and cyclists that get to those, we should try to build facilities, separate facilities for them. I've seen some of them already out here in Fairfax County. We're next to a 3 to 6 lane, so 3 lanes each direction, roadway. You have a foot and cycle path that's shared along it. It's still not a great environment, but it at least allows for a trip to be made, while otherwise the arterial would either make it a very dangerous trip or would prohibit the trip probably for most, and only those who really have to would risk their life to do it. So I think, and then when the arterials sort of intersect with neighborhoods or cul-de-sacs, we have to think about those intersections, how we can redesign them to make them pedestrian friendly. It's very hard to do. One thing I would like to say, and it doesn't help you with the arterials, is one thing that fascinates me here in the US, the fast population growth that compared to Europe, and I think that has, and many municipalities are doing that, has the great potential to have infill development and backfill some of these suburban areas and increase and create denser mixed-use centers, and then of course build walkways and bikeways that connect to those. The second question was just the bike lane that's painted on the road. I think the intention is good, and you're going in the right direction to do that. I would say, and it always depends on who you want to attract to cycling, and what the lane width is and what your budget looks like. Ideally, if the traffic volume is high and the speed is high, let's say I have a speed above 30, above 35 miles per hour, you should really separate cyclists. You should not have them on the same facility. And so I would say if you want to stripe a lane on a higher speed, higher volume road, I would probably not do it because it's quite dangerous. But at the same time, we have the need to create these connected facilities and allow cyclists to ride from A to B on these separate facilities. So if you just paint a stripe on the road, you will likely attract more daring, more fit cyclists. The research shows this probably be more likely male and younger. You will not attract everyone to ride a bike there. So I would say it's better than nothing if it's under the conditions that it's safe, but it's not ideal. But it's a first step towards the right direction. But also keep in mind that those who will be willing to ride there are different than from the people who you may want to attract to ride there.
That's great answers. I know the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking of the different intersections and examples of challenges in Northern Virginia related to this. And then there was a question for us, which is, is the session recorded and will it be made available? Yes, we are recording the session right now, and we'll have it available and send it to all the registrants and probably have a link posted onto our website. And then finally, well, actually, there's a couple of questions in here. Is there any enforcement for pedestrians and cyclists to obey traffic rules in Europe? Obviously, motor vehicles are less vulnerable, they should always yield. But do any countries ticket pedestrians and cyclists, or is if that does happen? Oh, I can't figure out how to use my. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm missing the last. If that does happen, is it done by police or a separate enforcement team? And that, I think, ties in a little bit with some of our issues with traffic enforcement in the United States.
Yeah, again, a difficult question. So the rules are enforced around pedestrians, somewhat more around cyclists. Often, it's similar to here with these sort of safety blitzes. So many kids, for example, cycle to school. So at the beginning of the school year, there may be enforcement around not just the rules of cycling, but also the condition of the bike. So, for example, if you cycle in the dark in Germany, you have to have lights on a bike, and that the police can enforce that. They're typically not enforcing it with a fine, but they may make you report to the police station showing your lights or showing that your brakes are in order or things like that. So there are these safety blitzes. You can also be stopped as a cyclist, and there can be enforcement of it. There's also much stricter enforcement of driving. And I didn't go into detail, but the study where I showed all these graphs in the beginning, we try to look at comparative enforcement of driving rules, and it seems to be much stricter in Europe. A lot of the strictness also comes through automated speed cameras and automated red light cameras, and they are sort of, I mean, where you put them up matters, but they are really blind to who the driver is or what the sex or the race of the driver is. Of course, if you put it all into one neighborhood where there are people of a certain race, there is some inequity in it. But otherwise, it's just a machine that measures the speed of your car. And that's much more common in Europe and much stricter in Europe than it is here in the US. In fact, we found many states that didn't even allow either speed cameras that are permanently installed, or they didn't even have or allow cameras at red lights. So I think enforcement for both is somewhat stricter. Who does it? I'm not an expert on this, but I think it's parking is separate, as the same as in the US. There's parking enforcement that's often done from the municipality, and then the police enforce the speed and the other things. With the speed enforcement, as I said, a lot of it is automated, so you will not interact with police. If you are speeding, you get a speed ticket in the mail with a photo on it. The police will not stop you. I guess they would stop you if you would go 200 miles per hour in a 70 mile per hour zone because you are a real danger to everyone around you. But otherwise, they wouldn't stop you. You would just get an automated ticket in the mail. But otherwise, the police are doing it. And then there are all sorts. And I'm not an expert on policing and how things work. My sister happens to be a policewoman in Germany, and policing is always difficult, and interactions can be difficult. But there seem to be less, and I don't know, maybe because the reporting is not the issues around policing in the European countries than are recently reported in the US.
So we have about 3 questions that all tie in pretty nicely again. They're not quite as much of a risk jump as I had before. The first, I'll start it up from Libby Garvey, who is our county board member in Arlington. Thank you for the it seems to me that social change and attitude shifts is what we need here. So what happened in Europe during the 70s to move away from the car-centric approach, which is an excellent question. And then somebody else followed on about what motivated the European cities to switch to higher safety for ped and bike. Was it grassroots or did it come from another policy? So I just wanted to throw those 2 in.
Okay. So to the first question, I think, yeah, it's social change and attitude change, and there are only certain windows of time when these often happen or happen at a faster speed. In Europe, the bicycling and the environmental consciousness was sort of triggered by, as similar to the US with the 1970s, actually, with some of the environmental movements and Clean Air Acts and things like that date back to the late 60s, early 70s. But so we had environmental issues, environmental concern. We had the oil embargoes. There are these famous pictures of all the autobahns in Germany and the highways in the Netherlands, where sort of there are no cars and people are out on foot and on bikes on these roadways, on these spaces to see what they are like or what they feel like. In the Netherlands, a lot of the traffic calming actually started, again, similar to the US in the 30s, because of traffic safety concerns. And the big slogan at the time was stop the child killing, stop the Kindermord. Kindermord means cars are killing children. And so people were outraged about the deaths among children. If you go back in the US to the 20s and 30s, there were many safety vigils, there were many even safety monuments to mothers and children that were killed by motorists. It was the same pushback, a lot earlier, of course, but there was this pushback against it. And so these were these special conditions that sort of came together: the environmental, the oil embargo, and then at the same time also the traffic safety that was not tolerated anymore at that point. Maybe we have a little bit of a tiny window like that in the US with the COVID crisis now. Many people have. We just published a paper this week about trends on cycling and COVID. We have a boom in cycling in many places, not in all places, where more people are riding bikes, where more people are out walking. Some of them for social distancing, others because they do not want to ride public transport anymore, which is another problem that's really bad for public transportation. But we have people who have picked up walking and cycling, and many have bought bicycles, record bike sales. Maybe that's a window into having some people bike more for more trips or more regularly. So maybe we have a little bit of a shift like that. We also saw that in the picture I showed from Old Town Alexandria, where suddenly the foot of King Street was pedestrianized. I've been living here for 15 years, and I've always wondered, why is the bottom of King Street open to cars? You cannot cross a bridge there. You don't have to drive through there. And it's so beautiful. And I've walked in Old Town for 15 years, and you see tourists bending really out of shape, taking pictures. And I wondered first, what are they doing? And what they try not to have the cars in the picture, because they want to have nice pictures of the old buildings. That's the strength of Old Town, but it hasn't happened. And now we have the bottom of King Street pedestrianized. We'll see what happens if it goes away or if it doesn't go away. But maybe there's a little window like that. And that goes to the second question then, the grassroots. In the Netherlands, it was definitely grassroots. People were upset with what is happening to their cities. And the import then of traffic calming happened from the Netherlands into Germany. And in Germany, traffic calming didn't exist. So German engineers went to the Netherlands, they looked at how they did it, and then they brought it back. And the federal government said first, you can't do this. It's not in our, here it would be the MUTCD, it's not in our standards, you can't do this. And municipalities starting making up their own traffic signs for traffic calming. And Finally, the federal government sort of relented and said, okay, we do trial projects. They did, I think, 6 trial studies to see what traffic calming is and how it works. And it worked, and then it started spreading quite fast. But it was, in both cases, the Netherlands and then also in Germany, was a bottom-up push to promote walking, cycling, and to decrease car use. It was not the federal government or the state government from the top saying that. In contrast, for example, the pictures I showed from Freiburg, where these neighborhoods where you can't park in the streets in front of the houses, that would be illegal according to the building code of the state it is in, because the building code, as in the US, requires minimum car parking requirements. And so the municipality then had to go to the state government and say, okay, you can't park in these neighborhood streets, but over here, which is on the other end of that neighborhood, we have a big park. And that park, which is now greenery, but that is enough parking spaces for the people who can't park in front of their houses. So if at any point in the future we would want to convert to the minimum parking requirements we have, we could take that park and turn it into a parking lot. But the point is, it's sort of a local effort that then has to work around the state rules that would actually make this development illegal.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I think if you have time for one more, we had a question about Fairfax and what do you recommend for Fairfax County, which applies, I think, to some other parts of our region, where you have a vast sea of suburban homes and a small islands of shopping employment centers.
It's very difficult, but I think, and I'm not a Fairfax County policymaker, but I think there is a great potential for Fairfax County. They're doing that to some extent already, to create or recreate a centeredness for the county, to put in centers that can be mixed use and higher density. And I'm thinking about things like the Mosaic Center here in Merrifield, that's already happening. To some extent, the transformation of Tysons, or all that's happening along the Silver Line, or some of the ideas on around Route 1 going south from Alexandria in Fairfax County. So creating these sort of nodes for people to live and then and work and shop, and then connecting these nodes also to local neighborhoods on foot and by bicycle in a safe manner. And then I think there's great potential to have some of these bicycle expressways, sort of thinking about bike routes through the county and looking at roadway crossings that there could be a bridge, there could be a tunnel, or there could be some way to allow bicyclists and of course also pedestrians to cross these dangerous places without crossing at grade, and then combining that into entire routes, either commute routes into DC or going into Tysons or going into other places. And then of course, once you have these trunk routes, then starting with safe connectors into these trunk routes to allow people to get around without a car. And what I didn't mention here, but I think you got the picture. I showed a picture from 1960 that's car oriented, and then by 2010, we were bike and pedestrian oriented. These were not fast processes. In the US, things tend to be faster, so I don't think it will take the US 40 years, but it will not be overnight. It will take a while to do this.
Well, this has been wonderful. This, thank you so much. We've gotten great questions, everybody who called in and participated. Dale, do you want to close it? Thank you so much for taking the time. This sounds like a great book.
Thank you so much, Ralph. Thanks to all of those that participated, and we really look forward to staying engaged with you because this is such a vital, important topic, and there is so much to learn and so much to apply from our friends across the pond.
And I wanted to share also that June 10th, we have a Safe Walking Summit that we're planning that'll be about community initiated programs. So I just wanted to share that with the people on the call, and also with you, Ralph. Hopefully we can engage you on some of that as well. Great.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks for everyone who listened in, and have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.